Hey everyone, this is Mike from the Comic Book Trove, back today with another Omnibus review, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the recently released and reprinted Miles Morales Spider-Man Omnibus Volume 1. Now, this is a book which had a couple of previous printings, although I believe the previous issues of it had been titled differently. I think it was called the Ultimate Comics Spider-Man Miles Morales Omnibus, or something to that effect. And there is also another Miles Morales Omnibus as well, which is going to be reprinted soon in addition to this one, and they're going to be calling that Volume 2. Which is pretty good because the previous titles of these books, I think for myself and others as well, it didn't make it very clear if you weren't familiar with the material as to which book came first. Now I think they've tidied that up and done a better job by just labelling them volumes 1 and 2. So here we are with the first volume then, newly released, and I'm going to take a look at this book today, showcase a little bit, talk about some of the material in here, and share my thoughts on that. So stick around and we'll take a look at Miles Morales' earliest adventures. Okay then, so here we are with the Miles Morales Spider-Man Omnibus Volume 1. And the first thing I just want to point out here is on the dust cover, what I've got here is a DM variant cover. This is a really nice piece of artwork featuring Miles, of course, fighting Venom by Sarah Pichelli. Pichelli, of course, being the co-creator of the character along with Brian Michael Bendis, and a lot of her artwork features in this book. I think she had a great style. Another artist that you see in here, probably the other one who you see the most work by in this particular volume, is David Marquez. Now, as I start to look through this book, I will talk a little bit about kind of where it fits in the Ultimate Spider-Man chronology, because it is part of the Ultimate Universe, all the material collected in here. Now, previously, not too long ago, actually maybe it is a while ago now, maybe about a year ago, we did get this release of the Ultimate Spider-Man Omnibus Volume 1, which collects the very beginning of Ultimate Spider-Man, the first 39 issues. There is a second volume of this coming, I think, in early 2023, and I'm definitely very excited for that already. But whereas that book collects the very beginning of the whole Ultimate Spider-Man story, this one is really the very end of it, because by the end of the material in this omnibus, the Ultimate Universe really comes to an end. Now, of course, that was not the end of Miles Morales' story. We know there's a Volume 2 of this coming out, and his stories have gone on beyond that as well. So Miles, at this point in time, is a character who has really cemented himself as being one of the mainstays in the Marvel Universe. But he began in the Ultimate Universe, and these are those stories. There's this cool bit of wraparound artwork I just wanted to quickly showcase on the book itself of Miles fighting the Green Goblin. Very nice. And as we just start to open up the book and take a look inside, I will just give a spoiler warning at this point before I really discuss anything in any more detail, because I'm going to talk a little bit about why Miles Morales became Spider-Man in the first place, why there was this other Spider-Man, why that was necessary in the story, and also just discuss some of the points of the stories that are collected in here themselves. So I'm not going to discuss everything. You know, this is a pretty big book. There's a lot of material in here. But I might either discuss or show something off that you don't want to see or hear if you've never read this material before, and I'd hate to do that. So just a fair spoiler warning as always. But Miles Morales then, let's jump in. So Miles Morales, at this point in time, I think he's 14. And really, it's a story that deliberately bears a lot of resemblance to the Peter Parker story. So he's a kind of bit of a geeky kid, you know, not super popular, but certainly a nice guy. And he is soon bitten by a genetically altered spider. You know, this is a very familiar story to anybody who knows anything about Spider-Man in general, I'm sure. But what's going on in the Ultimate Universe, in the context of this story at this point, is that Peter Parker, the original Spider-Man, had just been killed tragically in a big fight with the Green Goblin, in which they had both ended up killing each other. It was all very dramatic, very sad. There'd been a huge funeral for Peter Parker because by that point in time, everybody pretty much had found out who he was. So it became public knowledge. So Miles, as well as everyone else in the world, is fully aware that this kid, Peter Parker, was Spider-Man and that he has died. Now, as a result of being bitten by this spider, Miles starts to develop his own kind of spider powers. Now, some of them are very similar to Peter Parker, but he has a couple of specific, unique powers of his own. There is, for example, this really cool one. He's got what ends up being called, I think, a Venom Punch, where it's like an electrically charged punch, where he hits somebody and then they have there's like a delay, and then they get a huge shock. It's really cool. This panel, this is from Ultimate Fallout issue 4. And this was actually the very first panel in which we ever saw Miles Morales reveal his face under the Spider-Man mask. The reason why it was here and not collected in the very beginning of the book, presumably, is because it fits in better here in the chronology of the story, rather than just putting it first because it was a first appearance. I don't know, it's maybe a little bit complicated, but it works in that position, I think. But the story then, so as I mentioned, Brian Michael Bendis is the writer. He writes everything in here, and in fact he'd written all of Ultimate Spider-Man from the very beginning up to this point. It was really quite amazing, I think, to have just one writer handling this story for so long. But what was so great about that, in my opinion at least, is that it meant that you had a very consistent story. All the characters and all the events always felt consistently in line with what had come before, because it was just the one guy telling this story, so he had, full control over it. Whereas if you take other series where the writer is changing fairly frequently, things might not always flow so well. But I genuinely think that Ultimate Spider-Man, all the way from Ultimate Spider-Man issue 1 up until and including everything in this book, it feels like one long epic story. And if you do read it from very beginning to the end, going up to the end of this book, you're in for a great experience. I honestly think so. It's just a fantastic read, in my opinion. Some of my very my very favorite comics of all time, if I can speak properly. And I really enjoyed this Miles stuff. I'm always singing the praises of Ultimate Spider-Man in general, but that absolutely includes the Miles Morales stories in here. I thought he was a great addition to the universe, but what was also so great about it was that this didn't throw away everything that came before. So there are still characters who had been introduced and established during the Peter Parker years of Ultimate Spider-Man who still make an appearance in this storyline, because now there's this new guy running around calling himself Spider-Man. And understandably, people who knew Peter Parker have a vested interest in trying to figure out who this new guy is and why he's playing Spider-Man all of a sudden. So characters like Aunt May, Gwen Stacy, Mary Jane, and others who I won't spoil, they all come into the story and they all get to know Miles, and it's just really great. At the same time, Miles, he's got parents of his own. His mum and dad have an interesting relationship with him. There's that whole dynamic there, of course, of him trying not to reveal his identity to people. He's got a best friend at college or high school. I can't remember where he is at this point, to be honest. But this guy here, Genki, who is pretty hilariously written. He's a bit of a comic relief character, but also another cool guy. So he very, very much works well as a kind of guy in the chair, so to speak, for Miles. I mean, they basically used this character Genki was kind of adapted into being what was he called, Ned in the Spider-Man MCU films. So I think they very much took a lot of influence from Genki in here to create that character. But he's a cool guy, very well written. That's something that I've got to praise all the way through here. I think that Bendis did a great job of writing all these characters and these stories. Really, really good stuff. The artwork as well. A few different artists at this point in time. I mentioned Sarah Pichelli and David Marquez. There's 2 or 3 others that do bits and pieces here and there. But it's all really good. It all looks really nice. As I'm flicking through here, I'm sure you can get a good feel for yourself as to whether or not it's an art style that you agree is a good style or not. But certainly it worked well for me. I enjoyed it. Pages like this, just really quite stunning stuff. Really enjoy it. And just following Miles on this journey, as he comes to grips with these powers and the expectations, because it's quite unique in the case of Spider-Man, because as opposed to Peter Parker, who was the first Spider-Man, there was no precedent for him when he became Spidey. He was just this new guy running around in a funny costume, and that's that's that classic story. But at this point in time, with Spider-Man having died, Peter Parker having died, and being perceived by the vast majority of people as having been an amazing hero, now Miles has got these kind of big shoes to fill and to step into, and he feels the weight of that expectation on him, because it's almost like he feels like he can't afford to be a newbie Spider-Man and making mistakes where, perhaps Peter Parker didn't feel that same weight on him when he started out. So there's that different element to the character, which I think is handled really well within the stories in here. And all in all, it is just something that I highly recommend. So even if you haven't read, because I realize I'm talking a lot about the whole history of Ultimate Spider-Man up until this point, but you know what? If you'd never read any of that stuff and you just wanted to read Miles Morales, you absolutely could jump into this book without reading through 160 plus issues of Ultimate Spider-Man to get to this point. I think you very much benefit from having read all that stuff, but it's no way, I wouldn't say it's necessary reading. You can jump in here and you're not going to be lost. At the end of the day, this was a kind of a fresh start for Ultimate Spider-Man. It was a new character, so you're getting to know him as you read through this book. And I'm quite sure that that you wouldn't have a hard time getting into this book, whether you have or haven't read the previous material. But as I say, by the time that this ends, it was coinciding with the, I think, 2015 Secret Wars event by Jonathan Hickman. And part of that event, or in many ways a key function of that event from an editorial perspective, was to really bring the curtain down on the Ultimate Marvel Universe once and for all. So as I say, by the time you get to the end of the material in this book, you have finished Ultimate Spider-Man. But as I've also mentioned, it was of course not the end of Miles Morales' story, because what they ended up doing was finding a little loophole to be able to bring him and his supporting cast over into the main Marvel 616 universe, and those are the stories that we're going to see collected in the Miles Morales Omnibus Volume 2, which again is good stuff, but I'll be honest, the transition from Ultimate Comics Miles Morales into Marvel 616 Miles Morales isn't really a seamless transition in my opinion. There's a few things that that change as a result of that happening, which I don't think were handled as well as they could have been. Perhaps you disagree, perhaps not, but I'd like to hear your thoughts either way on that. And your thoughts in general on this Miles Morales material. Did you like it? Did you dislike it? What do you think of Miles as a character in general? I honestly think he's a really great Spider-Man. I think Brian Michael Bendis did a great job of establishing this character. And nowadays, of course, he's really a mainstay and a household name in many ways, thanks to the PS4 game, the PS5 game, whatever it is, the Miles Morales game, the Into the Spider-Verse movie, which was hugely popular and is a really great film. And then, of course, the comics, because at this point, Miles has been around for about 10 years or so, I think. So not a brand new character, even though it maybe doesn't feel like it, but he's been around for about a decade at this point. Some nice extras in the back here. This was the cover that was used on the previous printing of this omnibus, I believe. But yeah, some nice stuff in there. Absolutely a good book and a great addition to my Spider-Man Omnibus collection. I look forward to getting Volume 2 and hopefully to getting more volumes of Ultimate Spider-Man in general, because I would love to have the whole thing from beginning to end collected in omnibuses when all is said and done. But yeah, thanks for watching as always. If you stuck around and watched this all the way through, as I say, do let me know what you think about this book, whether you're planning to pick it up, give it a miss maybe, or if you're still on the fence. But hopefully this has been of some use to you, some insight if you're interested in it at all, in helping you make up your mind one way or the other. Yeah, thanks as always for watching. I'll be back again soon, guys, to discuss something else.